Welcome to Our View, the podcast, where we're changing the conversation about disability one story at a time. Here at Our View, we're all about education, awareness, and shifting perspectives. With each episode, we dive into honest, meaningful conversations with individuals from across the disabled community, amplifying voices, sharing lived experiences, and challenging the way society sees disability. Because disability isn't a limitation, it's a part of the human experience. So pull up a seat and join us as we broaden the view and bring real, powerful stories into focus. This is Our View. This episode of Our View, the podcast, is brought to you by All In for Inclusive Education. All In for Inclusive Education is a New Jersey-based nonprofit organization that supports inclusive education for all students with disabilities as a fundamental civil right. All In for Inclusive Education views inclusion as a means to creating an equitable, socially just, democratic society. All In's vision is of a society where all individuals are valued members of their community and have opportunities to reach their maximum potential. For more information about All In, follow them on social media on Facebook at All In for Inclusive Education and on Instagram at All In for Inclusive Ed. Also, be sure to visit their website, www.allinforinclusiveed.org. I would like to welcome everyone back to a brand new episode of Our Review, the podcast. I'm your host, Arthur Aston, and I am happy to welcome my guest today, Aaron Lanou, to the podcast. So, Aaron, thank you for joining me for this conversation today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation, Arthur.
You're welcome. And so this episode is brought to you by All In for Inclusive Education. And we are happy to have them as a sponsor for this episode of the podcast. So to begin our conversation, Aaron, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Share your story with us. You can tell us who you are and your profession, some of your hobbies, and can you also share what does inclusive education mean to you?
Yes, happy to. Um, I live in Brooklyn, New York. I've been here 25 plus years, but from a small town in Western Massachusetts, so I'm sort of country mouse in the big city a little bit, finding my way. I One of the things I love about living in New York City is all of the like wonderful weirdness that exists here, and so I have things that I get to connect with people about that don't like feel out of the ordinary, like my punk rope jump rope class, for example, where we jump rope to punk music, and I have friends who do weird queer DIY embroidery alongside me and stuff. And so it's one of the wonderful things I love about the city is the kind of like it's kind of great and cool and fine to find your own people in your weird ways that doesn't always exist in a small town. So I think it's just sort of, I don't know, in terms of who I am, and it's sort of related to my work in a way in terms of who we are including and why and how people feel like they connect and belong to a community and a group. But that's just a little, little sort of personal bit about me. Most of my work is around inclusive education. I'm an inclusive education coach. I aim to try in a bunch of different ways to help people make school work better for all kinds of kids. Is the overall goal. So I try to figure out how to help different people do that in their own way, and that could be, school teachers is the primary group that I work with, but also therapists like occupational therapists and speech therapists and PTs and counselors sometimes, certainly school leaders as well. And it's all about like, given your role and your connection to this work, how do we like create the conditions in schools so that more students can really learn, be successful, feel like they have that sense of connection and belonging, feel that they're seen and known, and that they're not, which what happens all too often, sort of on the margins, sometimes excluded, sometimes not even allowed to be in their neighborhood school with their, friends and neighbors from the community. And so I do coaching and consultation and professional development all around that kind of work. How do we make school work better for all kinds of kids? And it requires much like the work that you do with this podcast, Arthur, like changing mindsets, like sharing stories and letting people know how we can think differently about how, in particular, populations of students that I try to support, neurodivergent students, but other students with disabilities, and really all different kinds of kids who are too often marginalized or not supported, or as I said, excluded, how all different kinds of kids, like who they are and how their needs, yeah, might be different than a kid sitting next to them, but how that is like normal and natural and okay and totally doable and actually kind of wonderful too. And so some of it is just mindset work. Who are these young people that we're supporting? And then a lot of it is about the practices. Like what does it take to kind of rethink how we do school and what practices do we need to make sure are, part of our repertoire in schools to make sure that kids are intentionally considered and supported in the design of our schools and instruction. Um, I'm a former special education teacher, so I did my version of this work myself years ago. I was a special ed teacher for about 10 years, mostly in New York City public schools. I also am the son of a speech therapist. I was educated, as I said, in Western Massachusetts in this really fabulous school district that was a sort of innovative, ahead of its time, inclusive district, and sort of took that for granted as a young person and look back at sort of the power and real gift that it was to be able to be included in an area like that, to be educated in an area like that. And I also say all the time that I've just gotten very lucky in terms of the co-teachers and professors and mentors and bosses and people I've been able to like work with and alongside and learn from, who are all like the type of people who value these things. Like if we're going to do this thing called school and help kids do this thing called learning, like let's make sure we're really doing it for everybody. And that requires being a little I don't know, countercultural, being a little irreverent at times, making sure we sort of push against some trends and ways of like just doing business that don't serve the kids that we want to make sure are understood and served in schools. And I've gotten to do some really great work. I worked in a school that was a part of a program in the New York City public schools called the NEST program, which is an inclusion model for autistic students in the New York City public schools. It's a partnership with New York University. Learned a ton in that work, and then had the opportunity to join the team at New York University that supports the NEST model all around the city, where I was the director of professional development and also the executive director there. And now my work is, like I said, like more broadly on inclusive education across the board. It's a tricky thing to define. You're asking about like what it means to me, and it is sometimes, though it's like the bulk of my work, it sometimes takes longer to define it than I would like. One of the traps, I think, of defining something like inclusive education is that you want to not fall into the trap of defining it by what it's not, right? Just saying, well, here's the opposite of the thing I'm trying to tell you about. But at its core, it's right, it is about not excluding students. That's what it is not. But what it is so much more than that, I think, right? It is having an intentional sort of mindset and goal around making sure that we are designing education and designing schools and in designing environments that create equity to education for all kinds of students, regardless of their identity, or sometimes in very deliberate consideration of their identity that might be a factor that historically, or sometimes still, would have led to their exclusion. And that could be disability, neurotype, but also race, social class, and many other things that have historically led to students not being successful in school or not even being educated in, right, their neighborhood school. And it is complex work. It requires the mindset piece. It requires discussion of real practices and how we have to do things differently. And there's also a big sort of systemic structural component that has to involve whole school districts and school systems and politics that are very involved in either creating the conditions for this work to happen or unfortunately getting in the way of this work happening. And so I, in my own little part, try to tackle all those little pieces in whatever ways I can, partnering with schools, sometimes museums around the city. I also, in work that's very related but not connected directly to school and education, I'm on the Delta Airlines Advisory Board on Disability. And it's a really fabulous group of people. Really incredible dedication from Delta to try to do what I just described, not in the realm of education in schools, but in the realm of flying and travel. And so the thinking and the work is the same. Like, who are the folks here that are not considered and need to be? What does it take to do things a little differently? How do we sort of push upstream? How do we try to move the needle on getting people to see things differently and then do things differently so that people who might otherwise um, not be able to access something very, very important are able to access it and access it comfortably and naturally, like as anyone else would.
That's great. I love how you related living in the city to the inclusive education world. That is so true because in the city you find something for everybody. Like no matter what, you can find it for you, whatever you're
Yeah,
interested in. It's
yeah,
there and and that's really how a classroom should be. And and there's a saying, I forget how it goes exactly, but like the world is our, our classroom and it's just, we really in a classroom setting within a school like there really should be something for everybody there and just a way to, for everybody to learn in the way that they learn.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I love the way you related that when you were talking. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like brilliant. That's great.
Yeah. And I'm
Yeah,
also, I don't want to say I'm not knocking Western Massachusetts as a beautiful corner of the world.
no.
There's just a reality of sometimes smaller communities are a little bit, there's a little more expectation around conformity. You don't find your tribe as easily necessarily. And a city like New York City does tend to afford that for people. I think it's a big, big reason why people flock here.
Yes, yes, yeah. And that was the thing, the way you explained it, it wasn't like you said, it wasn't a knock to like small towns or anything like that. It was just,
Yeah.
it was like, wow, like you can, I think most people, a lot of people will be able to relate to the New York City or the big city feeling of, being able to feel included and find your, find your people there
Hmm.
no matter what your interests are. And I love that you are working with airlines because I love to travel and it's not always easy for me being someone with a physical disability that travels with a wheelchair, my own wheelchair. So I'm loving the conversations that are being had around the travel world. So thank you for sharing that and for
Yeah.
all of the work that you have done and continue to do. That's really really impressive and amazing to to hear all of the things that you're involved with. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, this episode is brought to you by All In for Inclusive Education. And back in January, you presented at their All In Winter Inclusion Conference,
Yeah.
and your presentation was titled "Busting Barriers: Making the Classroom Work for Neurodivergent Students." So this is a two-part question. First, for listeners who may not be familiar with the term neurodivergent, can you explain what that means, and also can you just give a brief summary of what your presentation was about?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I just want to, I guess, thank you for the thanks around the work. And I just want to name that I'm one small person trying to do my piece in this work. You're another person doing this work. And I sort of, sort of the whole standing on the shoulders of giants thing very much applies. I credit the people who do this work elsewhere in other realms that I'm not even aware of sometimes, other people that I am lucky to be connected with who do this same work, and also all the people who have come before us who have sort of knocked down doors and figured this out to be in a position where I can do this work in this particular way.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. I agree with you 100%. It's, we're in our own, our own communities doing this work, and together we are making a difference. So, for sure.
yeah,
And the people that have come before us, the people that will come after us,
you're here.
we're really doing big things.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All doing our part, that's for sure. And I,
Yes.
I think that actually is a good sort of like, segue into talking about neurodivergence and neurodiversity. I myself am neurotypical, and I try to be very clear about the fact that I do my absolute best to honor and represent the voices and perspectives of neurodivergent folks, but I don't want to speak for the community or any particular person who identifies as neurodivergent. but I do my darndest to make sure that I'm sort of representing these very, very important ideas, and representing this community as absolute best I can. There's a lot of nuance to understanding neurodiversity. So a lot of people are using the word a lot more these days than even, 10, 12 years ago when we were using it in part of the NEST program that I mentioned before, and other people were in the context of schooling. And there's a lot of like misinformation, oversimplification, that sometimes happens around neurodiversity. I'll share like my way I talk about it, which again is completely informed by neurodivergent folks themselves. I get my way of talking about this work primarily from Nick Walker and Sunny Jane Wise, who are both neurodivergent themselves, great authors and speakers, academics in this work. And again, I talked about inclusive education and all things are better defined not by what they're not, but what they are. But I do think, again, it's important to name that like neurodivergent isn't a diagnosis, right? It's not a disorder, so to speak. It's not anything bad or wrong or faulty. It to my mind, and again, representing this work best I can, it's an identity that someone might ascribe to, community someone might consider themselves to be a part of, that describes a person whose brain and or body works in a way that's different from what typical societal norms and expectations sort of dictate, right? And so someone might process information differently at a different pace or in a different way, make connections differently. Someone might have social interactions and communicate with other people in a way, again, that is not faulty, wrong, bad, needs remediation, but certainly is sometimes different than what other people, neurotypical people, would expect or even demand in certain situations. Um, so as someone who is neurotypical, I generally, though I don't always love it, and I have my challenges like we all do. I don't love like showing up to a place on time all the time. That can be hard for me. I don't love small talk. But in general, in my life, my neurology is more or less a match for what's been expected of me in school, on the playground, in job interviews, at the bank, all these places. Like I mostly can kind of follow through with what the expectations are, without a whole lot of undue like effort, discomfort, pain even. Like it may not be fun for me, but I'm able to do it. Okay. Folks who are neurodivergent have a very different experience. They've likely throughout their life experienced, um, again, discomfort, stress and frustration, and often the need to hide or mask or change something like fundamental about them because the way their brain works is different than what's expected in those same places in those same institutions. And so to talk about neurodiversity is something that describes the sort of natural and normal and even kind of wonderful variation that exists in any group of people. Right? There's diversity in our minds in the same way there's diversity in gender and in race and in sexuality, and gender expression, and all sorts of things. Like it's a normal, natural thing to expect. It isn't right aberrant or deviant. It is a way that some people are different from one another, and so there is no person who is neurodiverse, right? Sometimes that's one of the ways it gets sort of misused. A person might be neurodivergent if they themselves identify as neurodivergent. But neurodiversity speaks to the, again, difference that exists in a community, in a group of people. And so when we talk about neurodiversity, we're talking about people who are both neurotypical and neurodivergent in our case here, right? Talking about in a typical school or in a classroom, you're going to have a neurodiverse group of students. Some students who might right, be autistic, ADHD, dyslexia, learning disabilities, or other things that might fall under that umbrella of neurodivergence. And you're likely also to have students who are neurotypical, whose brains generally work in a way that you tend to expect them to work, in the context of school.
Great. That was a really great explanation. Because as you said, it's a term that we're hearing more often now,
Yeah.
than you said, like, 10 or 12 years ago. So it's really, I wanted to make sure that, we have a wide audience here. So I just wanted
Mm,
to get some type of definition that people could relate to what it actually means.
mm.
So thank you so much for that. And with that, we will now take a brief break to learn more about All In for Inclusive Education. This episode of Our View the Podcast is brought to you by All In for Inclusive Education. All In for Inclusive Education is hosting their summer All In conference taking place on May 28th, 2026 at Kean University in Union, New Jersey. Please visit www.allinforinclusiveed.org for more information. Registration is available until May 14th, 2026, so register today. All right, so welcome back. And to continue our conversation, can you share with us one or two takeaways that attendees would have learned from your presentation?
Yeah, so my presentation was about busting barriers, right? And the metaphor that I use to sort of describe why we're talking about barriers, you hear the term barriers used a lot in the context of Universal Design for Learning, UDL, and this is a very sort of UDL aligned way of talking about how we think about and support students in school. But basically, I use this visual metaphor of kids climbing the mountain of learning. Um, learning's hard, climbing a mountain's hard. It's hard for everybody. It's supposed to be. Learning's supposed to be hard. That's how we grow. But learning in school is a very particular kind of learning, right? And there's unnecessary barriers or boulders that we throw in kids' paths as they make their way through this thing called school. There are boulders or barriers like, sit still for 30 minutes. Not necessary to sit still in order to learn math, but in school, you have to sit still in order to learn math because it's how we learn in school. And there's lots of other barriers, right? There's the just listen to me talk for 20 minutes and remember everything I've said. That's a boulder. There's the you're going to learn a whole bunch of stuff, and at the end of this week, you're going to only produce a piece of written work to prove that you've learned that thing. That's a boulder, right? And the idea is kids who are climbing their way up the mountain of learning, they come to school with different tools, right? They come to the mountain with different tools in their backpack, you can think. And some kids just naturally have a certain set of strengths that you could think of the tools that they have as being like a pickaxe, right? And so they're able to like get to that boulder that says sit still and they're like boop, 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 and they climb over it because they've got a tool that's a match for what's expected in school. And like, okay, good for them. I was sort of a pickaxe kid, so to speak. My neurology just happened to be a match for the things that we expect kids to do in school. And other kids come to school with different tools, like flutes and toothbrushes. And I talk about snorkels. And snorkels are great tools, and they're really useful, like as an actual tool in the world to like explore the underwater world. But if a kid comes to a mountain, base of a mountain with a snorkel, and all of a sudden they're climbing up the mountain and there's a boulder in front of them, a snorkel isn't an ideal tool for that particular barrier that they're experiencing. It doesn't mean that they are like not smart or any less than the kid with the pickaxe. They just have a different tool than that other kid. And it makes this thing that we call school, the way we've designed it, harder for those kids who have that particular set of tools and strengths. And so the idea here to sort of extend the metaphor just a little bit and get a little bit abstract with it, but I talk about trying to like weave a net of support in the sky. So if we could like create this screen, like a hammock that hangs up over the mountain, and yeah, school's going to still expect kids to sit still, but if that screen is there, it'll mostly catch that big boulder before it comes crashing down in the mountain. And there might be some little remnants of that boulder that come falling down, but that's a lot easier to get over than the whole big boulder. And so our snorkel kids can maybe like, climb over that little stone of sit still if we only ask them to sit still for 5 minutes before having a movement break, right? Or before moving our bodies as part of the instruction or using our arms or whatever we're able to do in order to, remember a key concept. if we design school with this net of support that considers, what are all the different tools and strengths kids are bringing to school? And what are some ways we can do school a little differently so it's going to work for more kids? More kids are going to be able to be successful. And also, I hope, feel like they are seen and that they belong in this place called school because someone is thinking about them. They're no longer left to think like, this place is not working for me. Like, what is going on here? Everyone else, lots of other people seem to be doing it, and I can't. I'm getting in trouble in a way that doesn't make sense to me. I know I'm smart, but I'm being told on these papers that I'm not. If we're able to redesign how we think about school in some sort of key ways, kids are not left feeling that way. Kids know that they have strengths and are smart and bring value to a community and feel connection to their peers and can be successful in right typical schools if school is done a little bit differently. And so this is a long answer to your question of what might people have left with after my presentation, but I hope two things. One, the mindset piece that like there's nothing wrong with snorkel kids, right? They bring us a different set of tools and strengths to school, but they are no less than. They're not deficient. They don't need to be educated elsewhere just because they have a different set of strengths than other kids in their classroom. Um, and then we didn't have a ton of time, but we did begin to dive into some practices, some of the method piece. So, like, what are the things that we need to do differently in school so that more kids can be successful? Well, again, if you ask kids to sit still for 30 minutes and you have kids whose bodies just need to move in order to regulate or to learn, we need to make sure we're doing movement breaks or we involve movement in the course of a lesson or we have students move from one table to another in a structured way. In a way that works for everyone in the classroom, obviously, being aware of and designing for, planning for mobility differences that might exist for students in the room. If we have a, boulder that's just, listen to me, I'm going to be talking up here at the front of the room for 20 minutes and you need to remember everything I've said and then do all the things I just told you to do. Well, what if we limit our language a little bit? What if we have the directions written down and broken down very clearly and visually on the board or individually for tables or students so that instead of just retaining all of this information with kids who have different processing, kids who might have slower language processing or differences in their working memory. Again, normal, natural, and okay. They're capable of learning, but they have differences in the way they think and process. If we just write down directions, if we clarify and minimize our language, those kids are going to not be burdened by this, listen to me talk for a long time boulder and be able to be more successful and show what they've learned in school as well. And so my hope in the time that we had was that people left with a little bit of a shift or some like adding to their, repertoire of sort of understanding the differences that might exist and that those differences are okay and kind of great and have some starting points for shifts in practice that can lead to kids feeling and being more included in school.
Yes, I love the analogy of using the snorkel, and that it's so true. It doesn't mean it just means they have a different set, like you said, a different set of tools, different set of skills, and just that was great. It's so funny thinking having these conversations about inclusive education. It makes me think of when I was in school, and I was in school. I graduated in the year 2000, so 26 years ago this year, and just thinking of how the conversations have changed, and more students are being included now, and as you said, it doesn't mean that just because they have the snorkel and not the pickaxe to get up the mountain to get through the boulders doesn't mean they need to be in a separate environment. Like
Mm-mm.
we can all get there together. It's just, figuring out how and working together with everybody. It's really I like that a lot. So
Yeah, I'm glad it
thanks.
resonates. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. So to wrap up our conversation, um, can you share with us some useful resources on topics related to inclusive education or as it relates to the neurodivergent or neurodiverse students?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. As I sort of said before, I feel like it's important for me to talk about this in my work, and I also want to recognize that I am not like the source to go to for this information. And so I do think my biggest recommendation is go to the source, like read things by, listen to neurodivergent folks themselves who are talking about this work. I actually, right underneath my microphone is a book I just got that I think was very recently published. It takes all kinds of minds, fostering neurodivergent thinker thriving at school, edited by Rachel Davis, Claire O'Neill, and Sue Fletcher Watson. Like there are some great neurodivergent authors, educators, researchers putting out really important work around this that I think people, this should be the first stop that people take to learn more about this. I also mentioned a couple people earlier, anything by Sunny Jane Wise, who goes by Lived Experience Educator, sometimes online, their website, and also Instagram and other places. And if you want to get real deep, and I think people should, there's this great book called Neuroqueer Heresies by Nick Walker that really dives into what neurodiversity and neurodivergence is and isn't, that I think is great. It's not an education book, but I think to understand this concept and identity group and population, like that's a really, really important source. And then there's just, I think we're really lucky. One of the things that is different from 10 or 12 years ago or whatever is the number of people who are online sharing their experiences to the benefit of the rest of us. Sunny Jane Wise being one of them. There's someone named M who goes by NeuroWild online who creates these really fabulous, accessible, but very powerful sort of comics and illustrations about their experience with neurodiversity and neurodivergence. Lauren Melissa Elzy actually works with the NEST program that I mentioned. She goes by Atia Nell. She's a presenter and a librarian, an educator, and an author. Anything by Marenika Giwa Onaiwu, who's part of the Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network. I've gotten to work with her a couple times in the past, and she's fabulous. If we wanted to just keep going for another 30 minutes, I could keep naming people, but I think those are a pretty good start for folks to, if you're either new to this and looking for how do I learn more, or you're already steeped in this, but you want to make sure you're hearing the message from the people we need to be hearing it from. I think those are good places to start.
Thank you for all of that information. I agree with you. One of the best places to start, the best place to start is to listen to those who have the lived experience of of living neurodivergent, and just it's really great. All of those resources, we'll make sure to list those in the show
Hmm,
notes as well, and all the
great.
books. I'm excited for the books that you mentioned because I like to read, so I will personally be checking those out myself.
Great.
So
I'll lend you my dog-eared copy if you want.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So thank you, Aaron. Thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it. I learned some things myself. And as you mentioned, and for those who have listened to the podcast, I really believe that this is how we begin to make change and see more change by sharing our stories, our experiences, and having conversations like this. So I really appreciate you having taking the time to to have this conversation, and again for the work that you're doing and making the change in your communities and beyond. So I hope you have a great day, and thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Arthur. And thanks for inviting me to be part of this. And thanks for the work you do to further this
Yes.
work in your own way. It's a very important way to be telling these stories and inviting people to share stories and information with people. It's an important element of this change.
Yes, yes, I agree, and you're welcome, and thank you, and I will be in touch soon.
Sounds great. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. This episode of Our View the Podcast is brought to you by All In for Inclusive Education. All In for Inclusive Education is a New Jersey-based nonprofit organization that supports inclusive education for all students with disabilities as a fundamental civil right. All In for Inclusive Education views inclusion as a means to creating an equitable, socially just, democratic society. All In's vision is of a society where all individuals are valued members of their community and have opportunities to reach their maximum potential. For more information about All In, Follow them on social media on Facebook at All In for Inclusive Education and on Instagram at All In for Inclusive Ed. Also, be sure to visit their website, www.allinforinclusiveed.org. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Our View, the podcast, where we amplify the voices and stories of those in the disabled community one conversation at a time. If this story moved you, taught you something new, or sparked a different perspective, we'd love to hear from you. Write a review of the podcast on Apple Podcasts, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Follow us on all social media platforms at Our View for Life 25. At Our View, we believe that disability is not a limitation. It is a powerful part of the human experience. So until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and keep seeing the world through our view.